Roll call for day 9 of the legislature, Friday, January 20th. Anderson? Baldwin? Barlow? Whitman? Boner? Bouchard? Brennan? Case? Cooper? Dockstetter? Ellis? French? Murphy? Guru? Hicks? Hutchings? Ide? Jones? Kinski? Kolb? Landon? Larson? McEwen? Nethercott? Pappas? Rothfuss? Salazar? Schuler? Scott? Steinmetz? Anderson?
Appropriations Committee is excused. They're still working on the bills this morning.
Thanks, Senator Vick.
Anderson excused, Guru excused, Kinski excused, Nethercott excused, Salazar excused, President Driscoll.
Here.
26 present, 5 excused.
Everybody, Richard Gilby, retired Union Methodist. Welcome back. You have a hard time topping yesterday.
Looking around this chamber, Jesse Driscoll and I are the youngest and the oldest. And I see us as being bookends, trying to keep you people upright. In the years that I've been here, I've been impressed with these high school Senate pages. Their enthusiasm is contagious. Their willingness to be helpful is also contagious. And I thought you people might want to have a better view this last day of my prayers. So I invited Jessie to pray, and she said, I will. So may we pray.
Our holy and heavenly parent, be pleased to hear us as we pray. Conceive within us and give birth through us legislation that will provide health and hope, security and strength, vision and value to every citizen of Wyoming. We, as young people, are grateful for the adults who have paved a worthy way for us by their example, and who give of their time and talent to guarantee a future upon which we can build a meaningful life of personal and community fulfillment.
May youth quicken our aging minds, energize tired bodies, and their future be paramount in our thinking and decisions. Help us to remember the days of our youth, our fallacies and failures, our hopes and dreams, our enthusiasm and energy, our eagerness to learn and listen, the dumb things we did, and the harrowing experiences we escaped. And we give you thanks, guiding God, for saving us from peril and delivering us to this day when we can be of service to our entire state. Let us not miss the mark, waste the time, or neglect our duty to do our best in providing a fulfilling future for all citizens and resources. Almighty God, grant your wisdom and strength, safety and health for House and Senate in the remaining days of this legislature, and so we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Gilbert. This is his last day here. I already gave you one of the coins. I can't thank you enough from the bottom of my heart. Your prayers go right to the bone. You're good ones. We hope to see you back many times in the future. Thank you. Senator Bouchard, would you like to lead us in the pledge? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So, now we get to start on the fun part. Don't go very far, Jesse. We're at our end of our time with Jesse. It's her last day. And little like my speech, I'm having a hard time talking. Been one of the more memorable interns we've had. I'm going to read a proclamation I've got for you, and then we're going to ask you to say a few words. So, the 67th Legislature, State of Wyoming, recognizes Jesse Driscoll. A joint resolution of the undersigned members of the 67th Legislature of the State of Wyoming recognizing Jesse Driscoll for her dedication and leadership in academics, athletics, agricultural activities, service, and statesmanship. Whereas Ms. Driscoll, a remarkable resident of Hewlett and an outstanding student at Hewlett High School, has consistently excelled academically, including achieving A honor roll from 2019 to 2023. And whereas Ms. Driscoll has energetically participated in band, jazz band, choir, and sports, consistently lettering in basketball and volleyball. And whereas Ms. Driscoll has championed the Wyoming agriculture as a longstanding member of Future Farmers of America, 4-H, earning high accolades in competition and serving as treasurer, vice president, and president of her FFA chapter. And whereas Ms. Driscoll has consistently contributed to the business community as a 4-year member of Future Business Leaders of America, serving as FBLA chapter president 2022-2023. And whereas Ms. Driscoll has honorably served her school and class treasurer, student council treasurer for a member of National Honor Society, and has served her community as a hardworking youth for 4 years at Devil's Tower KOA. And whereas Ms. Driscoll has shown tremendous promise for future statesmen by attending Wyoming Girls State, where she proposed a bill which has now been filed in the 2023 general session and passed by the Senate, serving as page for the Wyoming Senate during the 2023 general session. And whereas the success of the state of Wyoming, the strength of our communities, and the future of our country depend on the dedication of young people like Ms. Driscoll, who wholeheartedly devote their skills and talents for the betterment of our communities, our state, and our world. Now therefore be it resolved by the undersigned members of the 67th Legislature of the state of Wyoming that on behalf of the state of Wyoming, we hereby congratulate and honor Ms. Driscoll for her outstanding record of volunteer service, peer leadership, and community spirit, and extend best wishes for continued success and happiness. Signed on this 20th day of January 2023, President Senate Ogden Driscoll, Representative Albert Summers, and the entire Senate. Huge thank you. Your dad would be so proud.
Thank you all so much. I know I thanked you over this whole 2 weeks, but also when I first gave this speech up here, but it still reigns true. I can't thank you all enough for supporting me through everything. I have learned more than I could have ever in these last 2 weeks of school here, and I can't thank you all for that. School's just kind of school, you know, so definitely better here. But I hope to come back for the last 2 weeks. Unfortunately, I'll be in the house, so boo, right? But that's okay. You know I'll come back and visit, so that's what matters. my bill's going through, and I can't thank you guys for that. Every one of you have been supportive and taught me so much throughout this whole process. Girls State taught me a whole lot of the process, but this taught me a whole lot more. Thank you to Senator Nethercott for teaching me in Girls State, as well as Senator Pappas, but then both guiding me throughout the week. Senator Guru as well, and Senator Landon, Rothfuss, that whole row over there, they kept me entertained throughout the week. The rest of you for supporting me as well. I've made so many connections, and I can't thank you enough for that. And anyone who sent my principal an email throughout the last 2 weeks to make me want to convincing him to let me come back, thank you. And if you want to send him an email, I'll give you his email address. Thank you, guys.
Here, Jesse. You got a couple more signatures. Reading, correction, and approval of the journal. Will the reading clerk please read the journal committee report?
Mr. President, your Journal Committee reports that the Journal of January 19, 2023 has been read and recommends it be approved. Senator Larson, Chairman.
Any objections? Being none, reports adopted. Thank you, Senator Larson. You're doing a stellar job. No doctor of the day again today. Today in Wyoming history, according to legend, the rip in the photograph that is a composite for all the Democratic Party legislators in 1913 resulted from a riot on January 20, 1913, the fourth day of the session, in which Republicans and Democrats fought hand and fist during a 45-minute shouting match over who should sit in the speaker's chair. We're past day 4. We're going to be all right, folks. Quote of the day: people who say it cannot be done should not interrupt those who are doing it. George Bernard Shaw, another good one. Final date for bills to be turned in, 12 p.m. on 1/24/2023. Final date for them to be introduced, 5 p.m. on 1/26/2023. Keep warning you every day, don't come to me and cry when your bill doesn't get in. So, messages from the House.
From the House of Representatives, January 19, 2023. Message number 120. Mr. President, the House adopted the Committee of the Whole report failing House Bill number 43, winter road closures. Aye 23, noes 38, excused 1. The bill has been indefinitely postponed. Signed, Katie Talbot, House Chief Clerk.
Thank you, Randy. Introduction, reading, and reference of bills. All right, so I'm putting this on. I've been exposed to COVID for everybody out there, so stay away from me. Fair warning, but we're keeping the bills clean, Randy. So, Senate File 129, first reading of the bill.
Senate File 129, background checks, Governor's Office.
Senate File 129 is referred to Committee Number 1, Judiciary. Senate Joint Resolution 9, first reading of the joint resolution.
Senate Joint Resolution 9, Right of Individual Privacy, Constitutional Amendment, sponsored by Senator Rothfuss.
Senate Joint Resolution 9 is referred to Committee Number 1, Judiciary. Senate Joint Resolution Number 8, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate Joint Resolution 8, Legislative Stabilization Reserve Account Spending Limits, sponsored by Senator Hicks.
Senate Joint Resolution Number 8 is referred to Committee Number 2, Appropriations. Senate File Number 136, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 136, Property Tax Relief Assessment Rate Reduction, sponsored by Senator Beitman.
Senate File number 136 is referred to Committee number 3, Revenue. Senate Joint Resolution number 11, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate Joint Resolution 11, Convention of States, sponsored by Senator Larson.
Senate Joint Resolution number 11 is referred to Committee number 3, Revenue. Senate Joint Resolution number 12, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate Joint Resolution 12, Constitutional Amendment, Property Tax Valuation, sponsored by Senator Dockstader.
Senate Joint Resolution number 12 is referred to Committee number 3, Revenue. Senate File number 130, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 130, Educational Freedom Act, sponsored by Senator Hutchings.
Senate File 130 is referred to Committee number 4, Education. Senate File number 132, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 132, Study of K-12 Education Program, sponsored by Senator Ellis.
Senate File 132 is referred to Committee number 4, Education. Senate File 133, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 133, Student Eligibility in Interscholastic Sports, sponsored by Senator Schuler.
Senate File 133 is referred to Committee number 4, Education. Senate File 134, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 134, Right to Farm Real Estate Disclosures, sponsored by Senator Bouchard.
Senate File 134 is referred to Committee number 5, Agriculture. Senate File 137, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 137, Subdivisions Fencing Requirements, sponsored by Senator Steinmetz.
Senate File 137 is referred to Committee number 5, Agriculture. Senate File 131, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 131, Prohibition on Delivery of Unsolicited Ballot Forms, sponsored by Senator Hutchings.
Senate File 131 is referred to Committee number 7, Corporations. Senate File 139, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 139, Unlawful Use of a Charge Card or Debit Card, sponsored by Senator Kolb.
Senate File 139 is referred to Committee number 7, Corporations. Senate File 126, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 126, Barbering and Cosmetology Practice Amendments, sponsored by Senator Ide.
Senate File 126 is referred to Committee number 7, Corporations. Senate File 128, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 128, Transfer of State Lands Exchange, sponsored by Senator Hicks.
Senate File 128 is referred to Committee number 7, Corporations. Senate File 140, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 140, Building Code Requirements Refrigerants, sponsored by Senator Pappas.
Senate File 140 is referred to Committee number 7, Corporations. Senate File 138, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 138, Unemployment Insurance Coverage Period and Reporting, sponsored by Senator Kolb.
Senate File 138 is referred to Committee number 7, Corporations. Senate File 141, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 141, Transportation Technology Transfer Center Program Funding, sponsored by Senator Pappas.
Senate File 141 is referred to Committee number 8, Transportation. Senate File 127, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 127, Wyoming Stable Token Act, sponsored by the Blockchain Committee.
Senate File 127 is referred to Committee number 9, Minerals. Senate File 142, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 142, Carbon Capture and Sequestration, sponsored by Senator Scott.
Senate File 142 is referred to Committee number 9, Minerals. Senate Joint Resolution Number 10, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate Joint Resolution 10, Right of Healthcare Access Constitutional Amendment, sponsored by Senator Rothfuss.
Senate Joint Resolution 10 is referred to Committee Number 10, Labor Health. Reports from standing committees.
January 19, 2023, Mr. President, Committee Number 5, Agriculture, State and Public Lands and Water Resources, to whom was referred Senate File 87, Natural Resource Funding, Large Project Threshold Increase, respectfully reports same back to the Senate with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators French, Hicks, Ide, Kolb, and Steinmetz. Senator Steinmetz, Chairman. January 19, 2023, Mr. President, Committee Number 5, Agriculture, State and Public Lands and Water Resources, to whom was referred Senate File 28, Livestock Infectious Disease Control, Tribal Inclusion, respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Hicks, Ide, Kolb, and Steinmetz. No, Senator French. Senator Steinmetz, Chairman. January 20, 2023, Mr. President, Committee Number 2, Appropriations, to whom was referred Senate File 61, Legislator Per Diem, respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Guru, and Nethercott. No, Senator Kinski and Salazar. Senator Kinski, Chairman. January 20, 2023, your Committee Number 2, Appropriations, to whom was referred Senate File 76, Wyoming Digital Asset Registration Act, respectfully reports same back to the Senate with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Guru, Kinski, Nethercott, and Salazar. Senator Kinski, Chairman. January 20, 2023, Mr. President, Committee Number 2, Appropriations, to whom was referred Senate File 82, Eligible Water and Sewer Projects Funding, respectfully reports same back to the Senate with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Guru, Kinski, Nethercott, and Salazar. Senator Kinski, Chairman. January 19, 2023, Mr. President, Committee Number 5, Agriculture, State and Public Lands and Water Resources, to whom is referred Senate File 102, Food Freedom Act Amendments, respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators French, Hicks, Ide, Kolb, and Steinmetz. Senator Steinmetz, Chairman. January 20, 2023, Mr. President, Committee Number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, to whom is referred Senate File 65, Compensation of Local Registrars Repeal, respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Barlow, Bouchard, Dockstader, and Hutchings. Senator Baldwin, Chairman. January 20, 2023, Mr. President, Committee Number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, to whom is referred Senate File 72, Employees Forced Chip Implantation Prohibited. So respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Barlow, Bouchard, Dockstader, and Hutchings. Senator Baldwin, Chairman.
Thank you, Randy. Bills on second reading. Senate File 13, second reading in the Senate file.
Senate File 13, Bar and Grill Liquor License Amendments.
There is an amendment. Can we have the amendment read in?
One moment, please.
Vice President Kinski, can you come up?
Senate File 13, Second Reading Amendment Number 1, page 1 after line 11, in.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Vice President. I move second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 13. I would ask this body to vote aye. Yesterday, Senators, we had a good discussion on bar and grill licenses. There was a new definition added that would include the word entertainment, and that would mean any kind of activity, physical activity, but it exempted the word gambling, And so there are a couple of big exemptions that are included in that definition. Years ago, we permitted historic horse racing machines as well as skill-based amusement machines. So what this amendment would do would be to insert historical parimutuel wagering machines as an activity that couldn't be allowed under this new definition of entertainment. And the reason I bring you this is yesterday I discussed the fact that over the years, we've had a significant growth in the number of parimutuel machines operating in Wyoming. There were about 1,000 machines authorized 4 years ago, and that number's now exceeded 2,200. Most of those are being placed in some of our larger communities in the state. Certainly in Cheyenne, you probably see these large facilities. And so there are other opportunities for these historic horse racing machines to obtain retail liquor licenses. I think it really distracts from what the purpose of this bill is in trying to make more family-friendly entertainment spots. I didn't include the definition of skill in there simply because we limit those to 4 per establishment already, so there is a natural limitation. But when it comes to these historic parimutuel machine or off-track betting facilities, some of those have as many as 100 machines. The largest one in Cheyenne that I'm aware of has 120 or so. And so I'm just a little concerned about the growth of these machines and just don't want to, I just want us to be thoughtful in how we proceed with this particular bill so that we're not creating yet another avenue for more off-track betting facilities. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Discussion. Senator Landon.
Mr. Vice President, thank you very much. I just wanted to rise in support of this amendment. You know, this is something that deserves our attention going forward. Really appreciate the senator catching this, and I think it adds a lot to this bill. And it was not, I think, the intention. At least it wasn't my intention. When I got to a place where I could support this, I certainly didn't have in my mind that we would create another spot where we would have these parimutuel horse racing machines. This is a different thing, and I think this is a good amendment. Thank you.
Further discussion. Senator Driscoll.
No discussion, but I need to declare conflict. I skipped over that yesterday. I will be a conflict on the bill.
All right, Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. So I appreciate the effort here, and I certainly be supportive of it. What I don't want to do is strand licensees that may already be out there. There are probably licensees that already have a bar and grill license and have historic racing. This, I believe, would eliminate those, and I think we should be cautious about that. So it may take a third reading amendment to bring something into the bill, or we deal with it otherwise. But I wanted to know if that is, if that's a purpose, or is this something we should, an oversight? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Driscoll.
And I guess I've got a question. I just sitting down and going through it. Why are we singling out historic horse racing and leaving skill games alone? We might add a little discussion, but I guess to me, machines and machines, we're singling out one. I heard the numbers, but it seems like we're singling out one piece, which the parsing gets a little interesting when we get there.
Further discussion before the sponsor takes her second time. Further discussion. Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I might have misunderstood. I thought the bill was authorizing and talking about future and prospective bar and grill licenses that would be added prospectively. So if this does interfere with, you know, I certainly don't want to upset the apple cart of what's out there right now. So happy to refine that, but I would like, I guess, the sense of the body if there is concern about expansion of these machines. So I just want to back up a little bit. My understanding is that there is a desire out there to grow the number of liquor licenses, and this bar and grill concept has been merged with something that was discussed in the interim about also offering tavern licenses. Certainly in my community, I'm aware of entrepreneurs and people that are looking for more options out there to provide entertainment and to grow our downtown in particular. And those would include, you know, not just offering, you know, bar and grill type of activities, but places where families can go, play games and be really family friendly and family centric, but also recognizing that parents might want to have a beer or two. And so in my view, that I really do support that concept. When it comes to skill games, we limit those to 4 per establishment. So as I think of these places, if they are offering pool and darts and family games, if they do have designated areas where there's, 4 machines tops that are 21 and older limited, I suppose I don't have a problem with that, Mr. Chairman. So that's why I left skill games out of it. My concern, though, on the other side of it is with historic horse racing machines. We don't have any limit in statute to contain how many machines are entered into a place. So as I look at places in Cheyenne, there is a bar south on South Greeley Highway that has, I think, and I was trying to pull up my numbers, but I think they've got 60 historic horse racing machines in them. And so that's my concern, Mr. Chairman. That particular establishment has a full retail liquor license. It's in a completely 21 and older facility. But my thought with this, the intent of this bill was that we were trying to have more family-friendly type options. So that's why it was limited to just the parimutuel historic horse racing machines. I'd still urge your vote.
Thank you. The question is approval of Senator Ellis's motion on Senate Reading 1 amendment, or second reading amendment 1 to Senate File 13. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
Division.
Yeah, chair's in doubt. All those in favor signify by standing.
Oh. Maybe vote for my own amendment.
All those opposed? That's the final count. Okay, yeah, the count is 19-9. That amendment is adopted. Back on the bill. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, I think it would be important as we move this forward. The amendment was a positive, but does seem incomplete. And adding skill games, certainly in my mind, would be appropriate if we're going to also add historic parimutuel wagering machines. I do understand the good senator's delineation there and specific concerns, but I would certainly be open to that. Thank you.
Further discussion? Further discussion. Senate File 13 having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a 3rd time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The next Senate file is 35, Senate File 35, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 35, School Crosswalks and Pedestrian Crossings Appropriation.
Senate File 35, and we have an amendment, Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Looks like we have 2 second reading amendments. I guess we'll have to read in the first one before I withdraw it.
Senate File 35, Second Reading Amendment Number 1, page 4 after line 7, insert.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I ask that we withdraw second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 35.
Done. We have another amendment. Clerk, please read the amendment.
Senate File 35, Second Reading Amendment Number 2, page 2, line 15, delete.
Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I move second reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 35 and ask the body's favorable consideration. Ladies and gentlemen, what this does, it goes into this crosswalk bill. It makes a few changes. Most notably, it requires a local match from whichever entity off system, as it is, something that's not a state highway, would have to offer. This is a best practice according to the department. And so what it does, it basically says that any city, town, county, agency, political subdivision, or any other entity that wants to participate in the program has to offer a 25% match. Also, it does get rid of the 2% administrative costs that could be used from the $10 million appropriation towards admin costs. That's just something that's going to be about $200,000 of something else that doesn't happen within the department. So to be clear, that's what the amendment does. It hopefully addresses some of the concerns that we heard on the floor and will help make these dollars net with the whole amendment, it'll make these dollars stretch a little bit further with some local skin in the game. So that's the amendment. Happy to answer any questions anybody may have.
Discussion. Discussion. Question. Okay, all those in favor of Senator Boner's second reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 35, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. That amendment is adopted. Senate File 35 having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 38, second reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 38, special license plates, organ donations.
Senate File 38 having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall it be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 40.
Senate File 40, Federal Political Action Committee's reports.
Senate File 40 having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall it be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it's so ordered. Senate File 53, second reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 53, Wyoming National Guard medical insurance premiums.
Senate File 53 having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall it be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 67.
Senate File 67, multipurpose vehicles, disabled license plates.
Senate File 67 having been read 2 separate times. Question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, is so ordered. Senate File 68, second reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 68, prescriptive easement for water conveyances.
And we have an amendment. Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Vice President, could I have that amendment read in at this time?
Senate File 68, second reading amendment number 1, page 2, line 6, delete.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. Vice President, I move second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 68. Members of the body, this is just a culmination of a lot of the discussion we had yesterday. I believe this is will help strengthen this bill and also clarify it. So when it comes to the terminology of adverse possession, I think it was pointed out, probably would be more appropriate under the law to use hostile. So you'll see that changes on line 6 and line 10 on page 2. And then to my colleague from Campbell County, I think he made a very astute observation. The definition of water conveyance certainly expanded it beyond what the courts have ruled, which were strictly on agricultural water conveyance mechanisms. So this just brings in, and it'll say for water conveyance systems for the purpose of for agricultural purposes, and it narrows it down, consistent with what the court rules on. The court rulings have been on that, Mr. Vice President. If there's no question, I'd ask for the question and ask for a favorable vote.
Discussion. Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor of Senator Hicks's second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 68 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Senate File 68 having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 86.
Senate File 86, voter identification, concealed carry permit.
Senate File 86 having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall it be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it's so ordered. Senate File 94, second reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 94, Federal Indian Child Welfare Act codification.
Senate File 94 having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 100.
Senate File 100, designation of spouses, revocation upon divorce or annulment.
Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I respectfully ask that Senate File 100 be laid back 1 day.
So ordered. Senate File 118, second reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 118, fund balance calculations, federal encumbrances excluded.
Senate File 118 having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Senate File 122, second reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 122, non-resident workers, vehicle registration extension.
Senator Guru.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. A question yesterday came up on 122 about what would happen if something happened where a person who had this, took advantage of this program, had to go away, had to leave town suddenly. I spoke to one of the authors of this bill and was told that since it's a monthly, you can get a monthly certificate, that you then could just not get one, and then you'd be fine, and then you could pick up again when you returned. Also talked about talking to the folks that are going to be issuing these when they promulgate rules, to offer if there is some sort of emergency vacation of it, that you could have the time extended. So that's the answer to the question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further discussion? Further discussion? Hearing none, Senate File 122 having been read 3 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it's so ordered. Senate File 123, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 123, Military Dependents School Choice.
Senate File 123 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it's so ordered. Senate Joint Resolution 6, second reading of the Senate Joint Resolution.
Senate Joint Resolution 6, Political Expenditures.
Senate Joint Resolution 6 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senator Case.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I'd like to request a re-referral before we go into third reading. If it's,
Okay.
Senate File 89, sponsored by Senator Furphy, insurance coverage for hearing aids. It's in the Corporations Committee now. I'd like to have it re-referred to Labor. Did I say that right? No, Judiciary. I'm sorry, Judiciary Committee number 1. Senator Furphy's on that committee, and they've agreed to handle that bill. I'm a little jammed up. Thank you.
Thank you.
So it's Senate File 89,
Senate File 89 is
insurance coverage for hearing aids.
Senate File 89, insurance coverage for hearing aids, is re-referred to Senate Committee
Number 1, Judiciary.
Judiciary. And Senator Landon.
Mr. Vice President, we'll be very glad to hear that bill. Thank you.
Okay. I think you beat Senator Scott to that. Senator Scott.
Mr. Vice President, I'd like to request a re-referral of Senate File 142, Carbon Capture and Sequestration. It was assigned to Committee number 9. It really deals with utility issues in good part, and Committee 7, like it re-referred to Committee 7. I've checked with both Mr. President and with the 2 committee chairmen, and I think that's agreeable all around.
Yes, he did. It is carbon capture and sequestration, Senate File 142. You good? Senate File 142, carbon capture and sequestration, is re-referred from Committee number 9 to Committee number 7, Corporations. Senator Brightman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. To join the re-referral parade here, I would ask that Senate Joint Resolution 11, I don't know the bill title off the top of my head, but be re-referred to from Committee 3, Revenue, to Committee number 7, Corporations.
Is it mandatory that we read the catch title?
Convention of States, I believe, is the catch
Okay,
title.
Senate Joint Resolution 11, Convention of States, is re-referred from Committee number 3, Revenue, to Committee number 7, Corporations. Any others? We ready for third reading? Bills on third reading and final passage. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, do you have a consent list?
Mr. Vice President, we do have a consent list. I move third reading consent list, which is follows. Senate File 8, essential subsidy payments to behavioral health centers. Senate File 22, Wyoming Public Safety Communication Systems funding. Senate File 34, trespass by small unmanned aircraft. Senate File 66, school capital construction funding. Senate File 79, Plan of Safe Care for Newborns. Senate File 91, Creation of Tenancy by the Entity. Senate File 97, Education Trust Fund Transfer. Senate File 98, Education Certification of Completion.
Would anyone like any of these bills removed from the consent list? Any of these bills to be removed from the consent list? All right, here, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall these bills pass the Senate? Oh, closer. Sorry about that. Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall these bills pass the Senate? Senate File 8, Essential Subsidy Payments to Behavioral Health Centers. Senate File 22, Wyoming Public Safety Communication System Funding. Senate File 34, Trespass by Small Unmanned Aircraft. Senate File 66, School Capital Construction Funding. Senate File 79, Plan of Safe Care Newborns. Senate File 91, Creation of Tenancy by the Entirety. Senate File 97, Education Trust Fund Transfer. Senate File 98, Education Certificate of Completion. The Chief Clerk will call the roll.
On the consent list, Anderson. Baldwin. Barlow. Whitman. Boner. Bouchard. Brennan. Case. Cooper. Dockstetter. Ellis. French. Murphy. Guru. Hicks.
Aye.
Hutchings. Ide. Jones. Kinsky.
Aye.
Kolb. Landon. Larson. McEwen. Nethercott. Pappas. Rothfuss. Salazar. Schuler. Scott. Steinmetz. President Driscoll. On the consent list, 31 aye. Senate File 8, are there any changes? Hutchings, aye to no. Bouchard, aye to no. French, aye to no. Ide, aye to no. Steinmetz, aye to no. McEwen, aye to no. Kolb, aye to no. Salazar, aye to no. Jones, aye to no. Larson, aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 8, 21 aye, 10 no. Senate File 22, are there any changes?
Hicks, aye to no.
Hicks, aye to no. Barlow, aye to no. Ide, aye to no. French, aye to no. Hutchings, aye to no. Cooper, aye to no. Salazar, aye to no. Beitman, aye to no. Kolb, aye to no. Larson, aye to no. McEwen, aye to no. Steinmetz, aye to no. Case, aye to no. Bouchard, aye to no. Dockstetter, aye to no. Murphy, aye to no. Driscoll, aye to no. Nethercott, aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 22, 13 aye, 18 no. Senate File 34, are there any changes? Hutchings? Aye to no. Barlow? Aye to no. Bouchard? Aye to no. Jones? Aye to no. Closing vote? Closing. Rothfuss? Aye to no.
Hicks, I don't know.
Hicks, aye to no. Salazar, aye to no. Ide? Aye to no. Steinmetz? Aye to no. Brennan, aye to no. Guru, aye to no. McEwen, aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 34, 18 aye, 13 no. Senate File 66, are there any changes? Scott? Aye to no. Bouchard? No. McEwen? No. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 66, 28 aye, 3 no. Senate File 79, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 79, 31 aye. Senate File 91, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 91, 31 aye. Senate File 97, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 97, 31 aye. And Senate File 98, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 98, 31 aye.
Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 8, Essential Subsidy Payments to Behavioral Health Centers, Senate File 34, Trespass by Small Unmanned Aircraft, Senate File 66, School Capital Construction Funding, Senate File 79, Plan of Safe Care Newborns, Senate File 91, Creation of Tenancy by the Entirety, Senate File 97, Education Trust Fund Transfer, and Senate File 98, Education Certificate of Completion have passed the Senate. Senate File 22, having failed to receive the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 22, Wyoming Public Safety Communications System Funding has failed to pass the Senate. All right, let's stand at ease for 10 minutes while they distribute committee of the whole amendments. It is now 10:57. Let's be back at 11:10.
Welcome home. Standing committee reports.
January 20, 2023. Mr. President, your committee number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, to whom is referred Senate File 72, Employees Forced Microchip Implantation Prohibited, respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Barlow, Bouchard, Dockstader, and Hutchings. Senator Baldwin, Chairman. January 20, 2023, Mr. President, your committee number 10, the Labor, Health, and Social Services, to whom is referred Senate File 65, Compensation of Local Registrars Repeal, respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Barlow, Bouchard, Dockstader, and Hutchings. Senator Baldwin, Chairman. January 20, 2023, Mr. President, Committee number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, to whom was referred Senate Joint Resolution 2, recognizing the service of Lester C. Hunt. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Barlow, Bouchard, Dockstader, and Hutchings. Senator Baldwin, Chairman. January 20, 2023, Mr. President, Committee number 1, Judiciary, to whom was referred Senate File 24, Financial Exploitation of Vulnerable Adults. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Case, Cooper, Furphy, Landon, and Schuler. Senator Landon, Chairman. January 20, 2023, Mr. President, Committee number 1, Judiciary, to whom was referred Senate File 108, Court Reporter Fees, District Court Discretion. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Case, Cooper, Furphy, Landon, and Schuler. Senator Landon, Chairman. January 20, 2023, Mr. President, Committee number 1, Judiciary, to whom was referred Senate File 112, Peer Support Counseling Confidentiality. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Case, Cooper, Furphy, Landon, and Schuler. Senator Landon, Chairman. January 20, 2023, Mr. President, Committee number 1, Judiciary, to whom was referred Senate File 116, Protection of Lawful Commerce in Firearms. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Case, Cooper, Furphy, Landon, and Schuler. Senator Landon, Chairman.
Thank you, Randy. Senator Dockstader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Having voted on the prevailing side of Senate File 22, I move for immediate reconsideration of the third reading vote on Senate File 22.
Okay, folks, you've heard the motion. This is an undebatable motion. We will have 2 votes. The first vote will be whether we reconsider or not. It'll be a majority vote. And should that vote pass, then we will go back and do a reconsideration vote on the bill. Chief Clerk will call the roll. This is to reconsider.
For reconsideration of Senate File 22. Roll call, Anderson. Aye. Baldwin.
Aye.
Barlow. Aye. Beitman. No. Boner. Aye. Bouchard. No. Brennan. No. No. Case. No. No. Cooper. Aye. Dockstader?
Aye.
Aye. Ellis? Aye. Aye. French? No. No. Furphy? No. No. Garou? Aye. Aye. Hicks? No. No. Hutchings? No. No. Ide? No. No. Jones? Aye. Aye. Kinski? Aye. Aye. Kolb? No. No. Landon? Aye. Larson? No. No. McEwen? No. No. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Aye. Rothfuss? Aye. Aye. Salazar? No. No. Schuler? Aye. Scott? No. No. Steinmetz? No. No. President Driscoll?
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing vote. Closed. For reconsideration, 16 aye, 15 no.
Thank you. Now we're back on bill for reconsideration, which was, I don't have the bill number here. We're on Senate Files 22, Wyoming Public Safety Communications Funding. Reconsideration. Clerk will call the roll.
Senate File 22, third reading, roll call. Anderson? Baldwin? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Beitman? No. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? No. Brennan? Aye. Case? No. Cooper? Aye. Dockstetter?
Aye.
Aye. Ellis? Aye. French? No. Furphy? No. Guru? Aye. Hicks? No. Hutchings? No. Ide? No. Jones? No. Kinski? No. Cole? No. Landon? Aye. Larson? No. McEwen? No. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? No. Schuler? Aye. Scott? No. Steinmetz? No. President Driscoll?
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 22, 15 aye, 16 no.
Senate File 22 has failed on reconsideration. Senator Hicks.
Mr. President, I move the Senate resolve itself into committee of the whole.
You've heard the motion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. We're in committee of the whole. I think, did you want to talk about timing, Senator Majority Floor Leader Hicks?
Yeah, Mr. President, what I want to do today is we're going to work right till 1 o'clock. So we're going to work through the noon hour and then we're going to adjourn till next Tuesday. We do have the Education Committee and they've noticed a meeting at noon, Mr. President. So at noon, they'll be excused to, Senator Scott, if you would. Mr. President.
Go ahead, Senator Scott.
Mr. President, we were at noon recess, and if that's going to be 1 o'clock, that'll work just fine for us.
Your call, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Folks, there'll be sandwiches in the break room, so, starting close to noon, feel free to get up and go grab a sandwich so you don't starve down. And with that, I'll ask Senator Beitman to come forward and be our fearless leader for the day.
Hey, good. I just shook your hand, Mr. President. Committee of the whole, please come to order. First Senate file up for consideration is Senate File 23. Will the reading clerk please read in the Senate file?
Senate File 23, Treatment Courts Transferred to Judicial Branch, sponsored by the Judiciary Committee, an act relating to courts. It was referred to Committee Number 1, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes Senators Case, Cooper, Furphy, Landon, and Schuler. Senator Landon, Chairman. Was re-referred to Committee Number 2, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes Senators Anderson, Guru, Kinski, Nethercott, and Salazar. Senator Kinski, Chairman.
Heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Senator Landon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move that when the committee of the whole rises to report it, do so with a due pass recommendation on Senate File 23, treatment courts transfer to judicial branch. There is a standing committee amendment, Mr. Chairman. I'd ask that that be read in at this time.
Senate File 23, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 14, line 12, after.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that amendment, and for an explanation of the bill and then the amendment on page 14, when she gets there, I would ask that you call on the good senator from the Southwest, Senator Schuler.
All right, Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring you a good bill from the Joint Judiciary Interim Committee, Senate File 23, Treatment Courts Transfer to Judicial Branch. I think this was really maybe an extremely important bill. If you look at the very beginning on page 1, really all we're doing with this bill is we're transferring responsibility and oversight of the court supervised treatment programs from the Department of Health to the Wyoming Supreme Court. We're making this more of a judge-centered court, which makes a lot of sense. If you think about it, these folks that generally end up in our treatment courts have gone through the judicial system. It really makes a lot more sense to really center it with our judges. So really, at the bottom of page 1, I'm not going to go through every page. There's 29 pages here, but it just moves most of our Title VII amendments or statutes to Title V. If you take a look over on page 2, again, any district, juvenile, circuit, municipal, or tribal court judge or circuit court magistrate may act as one of the participating judges in these programs. And then from that point on, most everything just takes a title change, you know, so if you want to look on page 3 at the bottom, you know, it's a Title VII to a Title V. Same thing on page 4. There's a little bit more interesting, I think, information on page 5. The court supervised treatment program staff, basically they'll disseminate, instead of having a middleman, basically the criminal history record will go right to the justices. Over on page 6, there's just one little part there which talks about annually they can withhold not less than 5% of all amounts provided in each contract with a community-based mental health or substance abuse program or provider, and I thought that was kind of an important part of the bill. Again, page 7, it's just switching over to Title V. Page 8, same thing. Page 9. If you have questions along the way, feel free. Bottom of page 10, it's kind of an important part there. BIII, the program or court supervised treatment program means a local court supervised treatment program that complies with rules and regulations adopted by the Wyoming Supreme Court. And then again, 11 through 12 through 13 basically just takes all of our Title VIIs to Title Vs. If I could right now, I would like to move the standing committee amendment.
It's already been moved by
It's already been
Senator
moved.
Landon.
All right. I would move that standing committee number 1 to Senate File 23 be added over on page 14, line 12. All we're doing really there is we're just, after certification, we're inserting an accreditation. And that was just something that the folks that were there that testified felt like that we should have both the accreditation and certification requirement in that portion. They used to have a panel. We've scratched that out over on page 15. And then from that point on, most everything else is just the change. If you look from Title VIIs to Title Vs, there's really nothing else in there other than just talking about the Supreme Court. We'll have the oversight here. On page 26, there's one little section I think that's kind of important where the talk about the court supervised treatment program that's established in Title VII, Chapter 13. Article 16 of the Wyoming statutes, as renumbered by this act, shall now be transferred from the Department of Health to the Supreme Court. It'll happen on July 1st, 2024. And I think that's pretty much the gist of the bill. If you have questions, I'm happy to try to answer them. And if not, I think our good chairman can answer them. Thank you.
We are on the amendment. Any discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, question being called. All those in favor of adopting Chairman Landon's motion to adopt Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to Senate File 23, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, Standing Committee Amendment number 1 has been adopted. We're back on the bill. Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just wanted to reflect the testimony that we received in committee, and obviously going back to the interim, a lot of work has gone into this by your Joint Judiciary Committee, but in committee here during the session, we did not get a negative vibe in the room on this one. We have a couple of branches of government who are very much on board with this. We've got a Chief Justice who is passionate about it. I think there's a lot of positives with this. There is an administrative impact, which simply means that we will send the budget from the Department of Health over to the Judiciary Branch to oversee this program. And there is an expenditure which has already been seen by the Appropriations Committee. They can speak to that, but $100,000 just simply to bring somebody in to do everything we can to make those courts what they need to be. So we'll have some consulting work over the next year, and then this will go into place in about a year and a half. So I think there's some outstanding work here, and it has a chance, Mr. Chairman, I think, to put these drug treatment courts in a better light and in a better stead. There's even talk about initiating a couple of new courts and adding a couple of courts out across the state. So a lot of details here, a lot of work done by the Joint Committee. We can answer any questions, but that's kind of the 30,000-foot view. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Landon. Any discussion on the bill? Senator Hutchins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Truly appreciate an opportunity. Just a little concerned about this move. If I have it right, the Department of Health belongs under the executive branch. And my concern is that this move may be a violation of Article 5, Section 16 of our Wyoming Constitution. The Supreme Court judges are limited to judicial duties. And Article 2, Section 1 of our Constitution, see if I can get that for you. Pretty much, separation of powers. So, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to know if we could get a ruling, maybe from the Rules Committee, if this bill is indeed constitutional. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks. Point of order on that request of the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee is not able to provide an answer as to whether something is constitutional, so that's not within the realm of what we can do. We can only rule on whether something is a violation of the rules. Constitutionality is up to the body, up to individual votes specifically. So if there's not a specific rule to appeal to, we can't provide a ruling on that, I'm afraid. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that clarification, Senator Rothfuss. Let's go to Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I suppose from my point of view on this, this is a massive change. It's a change where it went from local groups, and granted they had different ways of handling it in drug courts, to going into the judicial branch, where they have to basically take on a whole new set of duties administratively. And I hope everybody understands that, you know, this is not something, I don't take this lightly. It's a big deal. It's a huge deal. I'd like to end with saying, what happened to local control?
Thank you, Senator Kolb. Let's go. I saw Senator Scott, and then we'll go to Senator Nethercott.
Mr. Chairman, on the constitutional issue, this one is a little bit strange because it is a mixture of executive and judicial functions. The drug courts have been quite successful where you have a judge who's been an enthusiastic participant and really worked it. And the reason is that trying to deal with somebody that really has a substance abuse problem, you often have to use a hammer on them in order to get them through the first stages of treatment. It isn't a voluntary thing. So it really, to get in a drug court, you have to be guilty of, basically guilty of one of these crimes related to drugs. And it's very much like a fancy supervised parole is what it amounts to. It has always been sort of a judicial type of function. The judges are very much involved. So You can make a good argument that it ought to be in the health department. You can make a good argument that it ought to be with the judiciary. I think it'll probably work better with the judiciary, but the degree of supervision that the judge is giving, where if somebody doesn't go to their assigned treatment, you simply send them back to jail and let them think about that for a while. Get a little better motivated. So I think constitutionally we can put it either place. And then the question becomes, where is it most effective? And the Joint Committee has said, well, with the judiciary, and I suspect they're right because the success of them so often turns on whether the judge is a real participant and is willing to take action when the offender who's got the substance abuse problem doesn't go along with the treatment. And once you get them well treated, then you're likely to have success, and they've been pretty successful. So, Mr. Chairman, I think it's a good question to ask, but this one is odd. It's a mixture of functions. And I think we could put it constitutionally either place, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Nethercutt, did you still have a comment or thinking about it? Okay, let's go to Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wanted to reiterate, I actually did talk to a member of the Department of Health about this bill and just asked their thoughts on it. And, you know, they've done a great job in the past, so it's not like it's not something they'll continue to do it if we don't pass this bill. It's not a big deal. But I think the bigger deal is that it's the judiciary system that's dealing with these folks all the time. And we don't lose local control because if you notice in the bill, it talks about community mental health centers. They still will have to meet, you know, the requirements that they're asked to by the drug court. So they will have a local person somewhere in their community that they'll be dealing with, whether it's a private or a community health center. So I don't think we lose local control. I just think that this makes a better bridge between our folks that are getting into trouble in our judicial system. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll call for the question. All those in favor of Senator Landon's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with a do pass recommendation of Senate File 23, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. Senate File 23 has passed the Committee of the Whole. Next Senate file up for our consideration is Senate File 106. Will the reading clerk please read the bill?
Senate File 106, 2023 Large Project Funding, sponsored by the Natural Resource Funding Group, an act relating to Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resource Funding Act, was referred to Committee Number 6, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes Senators Baldwin, Ellis, Jones, Schuler. Excused Senator Grew. Senator Schuler, Chairman.
Heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Senator Schuler?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with the recommendation that Senate File 106 pass. And if I could, I'd like to have the Standing Committee amendment read in, please.
Senate File 106, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 2, line 21, delete.
Okay, and with that, I would like to ask Senator Cooper to do the honors.
Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First thing I'm going to do is just to address that Standing Committee amendment. On page 2, line 21, the word south needs to be changed to west. On page 3, lines 13 through 15, the dollar amounts need to be changed to $59,777, $59,777,715. And on page 4, line 2, strike the word private before funding. These are all basically an administrative amendment. They have no bearing on the bill whatsoever, so I'd ask for a question on the amendment first.
Well, you need to move it first, Senator.
I'm sorry?
We need you to move the amendment first.
I'm sorry. I thought it was moved already, but, so with that said, I move Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to Senate File 106.
Okay. Is any discussion? Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Cooper's motion to adopt Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to Senate File 106, please say aye. Those opposed? Amendment has been adopted. We're back on the bill. Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So before we go forward, I'd like to just real briefly talk about this bill. This is our annual Select Natural Resource Funding Committee, large project funding bill. We see it every year. A little bit of background on this. This is authorizing the Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust to spend the funds from their Natural Resource Wildlife Trust Fund. That trust right now is about $190 million. So it's really important to keep in mind that we're not spending general funds here. We're spending the earnings from that trust fund. These earnings go out across the state on projects for range improvement, for habitat improvement, for fisheries. There's some cheatgrass projects, all kinds of projects all across the state, and we get a great return on them. For every dollar that the Wildlife Trust Fund invest, they leverage about 6 to 1. So it's a great return for the state of Wyoming. Had a gentleman tell me the other day, he called this a jobs bill because every one of these dollars goes right back into the state of Wyoming, all across the state for jobs. So with that said, I'm gonna real briefly go through these projects. There's 9 of them this year. Usually we have 4 or 5, but I'll just briefly touch on that. The board has the discretionary spending capacity to spend up to $200,000 on these projects right now. With the inflation and the way things have gone the last couple of years, that $200,000 gets spent pretty fast, and so 4 of these smaller projects that would normally be a discretionary type item have fallen into the large projects. So there we go. So our first project is the Teton migration. The sponsor of it is Teton County. The cost for the whole project is pretty substantial. $59,777,715. But what the trust fund has done here is Teton County came and asked for matching funds. Teton County themselves have taxed their citizens, and they are putting $1 million into this trust fund on a 1-to-1 match. So the total grant from the fund would be $2 million, half of it from Teton County, half of it from the trust fund. And the leverage on that is right at 59 to 1. So that's a pretty substantial return for the state. The second project is called the Fishhook Ranch Conservation Easement. It's sponsored by the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. And what this does is it takes approximately 1,200 acres of the upper North Platte, some of the, maybe one of the prime fisheries in the state, and puts it into a no development for residential type situation. It's key seasonal habitat for mule deer, elk, moose, antelope, and eagles. And it maintains a lot of migration corridors that are really important to the area. It conserves a lot of really valuable riparian area, wetlands and grasslands along the river there. And it allows this 1,200 acre piece of property to stay in agriculture production without the threat of development, which is very real in that area. The total cost of this project is $4,250,000, of which the grant to the project would be $525,000. That's a 7-to-1 leverage on our money, a great return on our money. The third project is Lakeview Canal Fish Passage. This is on the beautiful South Fork of the Shoshone River, southwest of Cody. It's a great project. What they're doing is replacement and improvement of a headgate for the Lakeview Canal to improve irrigation and better distribution of the water. Around this headgate, they're going to put a fish ladder, and these trust funds will be used for the fish ladder portion of this only. Along with that, what's happening, that the need for this fish ladder is there. A lot of fish get trapped in that canal rather than stand in the river. This will prevent the entrainment of approximately 51,000 fish annually. Total cost of the project is $2.32 million. The portion for the trust fund is $450,000, which is a 4.16-to-1 return. Another great return for the state of Wyoming. The next project is the Wind River Reservation Feral Horse Removal. And that's exactly what it says. It's sponsored by the Wyoming Wild Sheep Foundation. What's happening is there are thousands of feral horses out there now. They've done a couple of gathers, but they need to do more. These horses are encroaching on a bighorn sheep range to the north, and on the mule deer winter range. The total cost of this gather is going to be about $2.1 million. The trust fund portion will be $275,000. That's one of those that falls just above that $200,000 threshold. But we're getting a 7-to-1 return on our money, and that's a pretty good shot there. The next project is the SR Cattle Company Conservation Easement, sponsored by the Wyoming Stock Growers Livestock Trust. This is a piece of land up in Sheridan County on Wolf Creek. It's currently bordered, I believe, on the west by state lands. It's bordered on the south by an existing easement, and this brings a large piece of property, I believe about 2,500 acres, that it protects from development, which is encroaching right up to the edges of it, in an area that's rapidly being run over by development. The purpose of it is to maintain agricultural production and to keep this in a farm and ranch type situation. The total cost of the project is $7.4 million, and from the State Lands Trust will be $895,000, a 7.26-to-1 leverage. The next one is one that I think is pretty extremely beneficial. It's sponsored by the Uinta County Conservation District. It's called the Sims Creek Slough. And what this is a restoration of a fish habitat to allow migration of spawning fish and return of juvenile fish to approximately 12 miles of the Bear River in Uintah County. The fish we're worried about is primarily the Bonneville cutthroat, which is on the endangered list. It's about to be on the, well, it's, yeah, we're looking at restored habitat so that we can keep the fish in the river where they belong. How's that? I'll just stop with that. The total cost of the project is only $829,000, and the grant portion is $225,000. Another one of those that should be in the small projects, but here it is. 2.681 return to our state. Another great project. The next one is the Little Medicine Bow River Restoration Project. It's sponsored by the Medicine Bow Conservation District. And this is a restoration of upland lands up there and the river itself to redevelop streams, put the river back into a natural flood plain. It's been disturbed over the years with mining and a lot of other things. And so this is basically a reclamation project. This is, I don't remember, second or third stage of this project. And I believe it puts about 25 miles of the Little Snake River back in shape. We're trying to reduce erosion. We're trying to maintain water quality, repair these uplands, and also improve the irrigation infrastructure. It's a pretty good sized project, $1,160,000. Another one that should fall in that small project, our portion would be about $300,000, which is about a 2.871 return on our dollars. The next project, yesterday you met Mr. Ellsbury here. It is the Ellsbury Ranch Conservation Easement in Crook County, sponsored by the Wyoming Stock Growers Livestock Trust. This easement puts about 2,600 acres into easement and protects it from development, keeps it in the family. There's some outside benefits to it. There's some really important wildlife corridors through there. There's a lot of forest and riparian lands that are preserved, and it's another great easement project. $5,391,000, which our portion would be $663,000, or a 2.871 to 2.87 to 1 return. The final project is the New Fork 351, they call it. It's a river restoration project in Sublette County on the New Fork River. They're trying to stabilize stream functions on about 3 miles of the river and restore a historic island in the river that was, due to irrigation projects and whatnot, ended up being bypassed by the river. The island was a staging area on the Oregon Trail. The trains would stop on the east side of the river, move out to the island, stage there, and then move on across. So a lot of historic value there. Total cost of this project is $685,000. The state's portion is $220,000, or excuse me, the Wildlife Trust Fund is $220,000. So very little cost. It's another one of those small projects, should be small projects, but it fell into the large project. The fiscal note on this thing talks about appropriation. But remember, this is appropriating money from the trust money from their earnings account to their
to their ability to spend it. This is no appropriation by the state. It's simply transferring their money from their earnings account to allow them to spend the money. Kind of droned on for a while, but it's a pretty big project. With that said, stand for questions.
Thank you, Senator. Any questions? Senator Hicks?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, on page 8, a real quick question, and this deals with the Wind River feral horse removal project. So curious to the nature of the type of removal they're going to utilize. Is this going to be gathers similar to the BLM? And was there any discussion of ongoing expenses? Typically, these wild horse herds will double every 3 years. Is this going to be an ongoing expense? And so kind of two questions there. And then was there any discussion if these horses are either going to be put up for sale for whatever means, was there any discussion when the revenue comes back in from the sale of the horses that the state would get a pro rata share? In other words, if we put 20% of the project cost in, the sale of these horses generates a certain amount of money, where does that sales money go? Or was there any discussion that we would get a pro rata reimbursement share for our cost with that? So a little more on that project, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had some questions on page 14K, the Ellsbury Ranch Conservation Easement. Question on the removal of residential development rights. Can you tell me how that's done? And is it into perpetuity, a few years? What's the time limit on that? And then who goes out and does the maintaining? Is that the state, or is that the family that goes out and accomplishes A, B, C, D, E on page 15? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Any more questions before we go back to, yes, Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, on the Little Medicine Bow River project, first let me say my family ranch does own the Little Medicine Bow River for a little stretch, but in Albany County, so we're not involved in this, and I don't have a conflict. What I would like to know is where on the Little Medicine is this Carbon County project located? How far downstream?
Want to take those, Senator Cooper, and then we might have some more for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'll answer the question on the Little Medicine Bow. It's my understanding it is from all the way down from Medicine Bow back up the river for approximately 25 miles. So that's the direction I was given. Secondly, to the senator directly in front of me, these conservation easements, let me make sure I understood your question first, Senator. These conservation easements are maintained by the family. I know there was another part to it. I don't recall what it was, but the way they work is the development part of it. What an easement does, what these easements do is ensure that this land will stay in ag only for perpetuity. You can do mining, you can do oil and gas development, you can do the things that would normally happen there. You just can't subdivide it. That's the purpose of the easement. And to the wild horse question, this is the next of 3 additional gathers. I don't know the disbursement of the horses, but I'll find that out and where those funds would come back to. This is a cooperative deal with the reservation. There is no BLM involved in it. So it is strictly a tribal gather. And again, no BLM involvement whatsoever in this particular gather. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Any further questions? Seeing none, sensing the body is ready to vote. All those in favor of Senator Schuler's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report it, do so with a due pass recommendation on Senate File 106, please say aye. Those opposed? Senate File 106 is passed the Committee of the Whole. Senator Ellis,
Mr. Chairman, may I have privilege of the floor?
the floor is yours, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, I have some special guests in the Senate. My husband Dennis up there in the gallery, but I brought my two children, Marlo and Archie. Marlo is a freshman at Central High School. Archie is a 7th grader at McCormick Junior High. They are out of class today. There's one more child in the Ellis brood, Lindy, but she's at school today, elementary's in school. So I have two of three of kids here with me. I'm excited they're here to watch us do our work, so let's give them some good debate. Please welcome my kids, Marlo, Archie, and my husband, Dennis.
Welcome to the Senate Ellis clan. I remember when you guys were a lot littler when I first came, just like my kids. It's good to see you here again. Okay, next file up for our consideration is Senate File 41. Will the reading clerk please read it in?
Senate File 41, Skill-Based Amusement Games Authorized Locations, sponsored by the Revenue Committee, an act related to gaming, was referred to Committee Number 8, Committee Number 6, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Ellis, Guru, Jones, and Schuler. Senator Schuler, Chairman.
Heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Senator Schuler? You're back on the hot seat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report it, do so with the recommendation that Senate File 41 do pass. And I'd also like to have the amendment read in if I could.
Senate File 41, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 2, line 2, after.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is pretty much a clarification of where we want our, it basically just limits where our skill-based amusement games can be located in a nutshell. And it's the amendment, I think I'll just go ahead and skip to that right now on page 2 if you want to turn to your bill. And the amendment, basically, we had talked about establishment at the top. And so on line 2, we are going to insert truck stop. Excuse me, after truck stop, we're going to insert smoke shop or any establishment that's licensed or permitted to sell alcoholic liquor or malt beverages. Basically, it has to be a 21 and up place in order to be able to use these. Let's go ahead and take a look at the second part of it. Smoke shop after, line 2, lines 8 through 19 on that same page, just basically talks about truck stop means a business premises that's equipped with diesel islands used for fueling commercial motor vehicles. That includes a convenience store and maintains parking spaces dedicated to commercial vehicle use. We had quite a bit of conversation in the interim about how to define a truck stop. This definition, I think, just kind of clarifies it a little bit more. We had looked at one time of, trying to decide how many thousands of gallons of diesel that they would sell and so on and so forth, and it just muddied the waters. So I think this amendment will make it a little bit clearer. And then if you take a look at page 2, also after line 19, we insert XXII smoke shop, which just means a retailer as defined in our statutes 14.3, 301A, 3 little I, that derives 50% or more of its gross annual revenue from nicotine products as defined by statute 14.3, 301A VI. So that in a nutshell is the amendment. We added the smoke shop, which I thought was a good addition to this. So if there's no questions on the amendment, I would ask that we vote on that.
Well, we need a motion on the amendment
I
first.
did not make the motion, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I would move Standing Committee Number 1 to Senate File 41 and ask for your favorable consideration.
Is there any discussion on the amendment? Any discussion? Seeing, Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, my question is, with the amendment, am I right in thinking that we're just expanding the number of places these gambling things can be? If so, Mr. Chairman, I would hope we would oppose that. I think we're going way too far down the road to being just a wide open gambling state.
Any more discussion before we turn it back? Yes, Senator Driscoll, President Driscoll.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just pop in real quick. I think this amendment really changed the full intent of the bill. If you go back and look at it before the amendment, the bill was really one that set it up for truck stops. We've redefined them, and what we're really doing is we're going to put a pile of machines into C-stores and on corners. And I personally have a hard time with that. I don't have a trouble with truck stops the way it was originally defined, but this bill redefined where you're putting them downtown and where I may be stopping on the way to school to pick up a candy bar with my kids. I don't think it's a great spot for skill games. So I'd ask if it stands amended that you oppose the bill. Thank you.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To help my my chairman out a little bit on this definition, I think the concern arose out of the definition of truck stops as it came out of the Revenue Committee, that it was maybe a little too narrow. The number that we saw in the original bill was 50,000 gallons of diesel sold per month on a parcel of land that was 2 acres. Well, it started to beg the question, what if you have a truck stop that's 1.9 acres and only sold 49,000 gallons that month? It just seemed like a really burdensome way to measure whether or not it was appropriate to have a facility there. So the language we landed on in the Senate travel was that any business that's equipped with diesel islands used for fueling commercial motor vehicles. So the intent of this was to really get after those large truck stops that we primarily find along the I-80 or I-25 corridor. So if there needs to be a further clarifying amendment on second reading, I think that's appropriate. One thing that we could consider, we didn't adopt in the committee, was limiting it to interstate travel, requiring that these truck stops be along the I-25, I-80, or I-90 corridors. That certainly would be a way to limit this so that we're not finding them in the middle of towns. And to answer the tall senator from Natrona County's question, and initially when we set up this framework for skill-based games to operate in the state, the way the legislature understood it, and as I understood it and working on that, was that it was really to prevent or to set up the framework, and that any future growth would need to be authorized by the legislature. Our Attorney General's office and the Gaming Commission has taken a different view. They've drafted rules to authorize skill game expansion. And once those rules are final, they'll begin processing those applications. So this really is an attempt to limit the number of places and establishments where skill games can be located rather than to expand it. So if you wanted to have the conversation about expansion, I just wanted to clarify, that's the interpretation that our Attorney General's office has offered and the one that the Gaming Commission is operating under. So I urge you to vote for this as a means of limiting and the legislature actually picking where these locations are, rather than, right now, without this bill, we could be seeing them in those small C stores, laundromats, hotels, name your establishment. So this really is an attempt to limit it to age-appropriate places where patrons are 21 years or older, as well as truck stops, which have been very lucrative for Wyoming. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Any further discussion? Seeing none. Ready for the question? All right, question being called. All those in favor of Senator Schuler's motion to adopt Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 as Senate File 41, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? No. Chair's in doubt. We'll do a standing division. All those in favor of Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, please rise. I'll be high. Okay, all those opposed? Okay, the vote was 15 ayes, 9 no. The amendment has been adopted. We're back on the bill. Any discussion on the bill? Senator Schuler.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I made that admission of the fact that this is expansion, I apologize. This is not. This is basically, this legislation just clarifies where these locations should be restricted to 21 areas. And so you'll see them, you know, in fraternal organizations and bars, smoke shops and truck stops. And so I think that, you know, by limiting these, we understand that it's going to be 21 and above folks that might be doing these. And the other thing I think as a reminder is that the skill games have not expanded. Unlike, you know, some of the other things in our state, they've not expanded since the legislative and regulatory actions that were taken in 2020. And I think that's really important. The other thing that I'd just like to mention is that they bring in a 20% state tax. 45% of that goes to cities, towns, or counties where the revenue is collected. 45% goes to the school foundation account, 10% to the Wyoming Gaming Commission. And these are limited to four of these in any establishment. They can only play up to $3. And so these are just supplying, you know, supplemental revenue to some of these organizations, and particularly during the COVID situation. For a lot of these folks that I've talked to that have these in their businesses, it was very, very helpful. You know, they were able to get some people to come back and at least get a little bit more revenue into their businesses. So I hope that helps explain. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Any further discussion? Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Schuler's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report it, do so with a do pass recommendation of Senate File 41, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Senate File 41 has passed the committee of the whole. Next Senate file up for our consideration is Senate File 96. Will the reading clerk please read the Senate file?
Senate File 96, Omnibus Water Bill Planning and Administration, sponsored by the Water Committee, an act relating to water development projects, was referred to Committee Number 5, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators French, Hicks, Ide, Kolb, and Steinmetz. Senator Steinmetz, Chairman. Was re-referred to Committee Number 2, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Guru, Kinski, Nethercott, and Salazar. Senator Kinski, Chairman.
Heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Senator Steinmetz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the committee of the whole rises to report it, do so with a recommendation that Senate File 96 do pass. And for an explanation of this good little bill, I call on the senator from Park County.
All right, Senator French.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senators, this is a pretty straightforward bill. There was passed out to everybody a list of the projects. So if you have that, kind of start looking down through that. This is Omnibus Water Bill Planning and Administration. An act relating to water development projects, authorizing specified level 1 and level 2 studies, providing appropriations, requiring reports, providing for the reversion of unexpended funds, authorizing unobligated funds to be used to complete other designated projects as specified, extending reversions and study dates, authorizing in position, amending funding source for the Board of Control, and providing for effective dates. If you look on your list that was passed out, I'll just, on the top of your list, Glendo Water Master Plan, Newcastle Water Master Plan, Orchard Valley Water Master Plan, Manchester Water Master Plan, Rollins Water Master Plan, UW Water Research Program, Wardell Water Master Plan. Level 2, you'll see what's listed there. Level 1 project rehabilitation. You'll see there's 4 projects listed there. Below that, level 2 projects, rehabilitation. There's 5 listed there, and the cost all along, excuse me, Senators, all along to the right of what I'm mentioning is the cost. As you go down, there's the Green River, Little Snake River Basin Conveyance Law Study. Below that, level 2 projects, amendments, Douglas Test Well Study, and the cost, again, with all these things to the right. Below that, Norwood River Storage, Alkalite Creek, the cost. General Fund to Wyoming Water Development Association transfer. It states what that is. State Engineers Office Border Control funding. Upper Colorado River Basin Project Coordinator. This one, since we all know that Colorado River Basin is, we're in the upper part of the basin states, and man, you know, with that historic drought on the Colorado River, that is really affecting every state that's has water that flows into the Colorado River. So they're wanting a full-time employee, as you'll see on the far right, and that cost associated with that. What they want there is somebody dedicated full-time to that. That's a major thing for us, that the Green River area and everybody that uses water in the Green River Basin, and the calls on that, you know, that river was never designed to provide water for 45 million people in a desert. You know, but that population continues to grow, and with a historic drought, Lake Powell and Lake Mead are in trouble. Lake Powell's close to not being able to produce power, and that affects people in Wyoming. I was on our local REA board of directors for a number of years, and we always called it WAPA. We had a WAPA line go through Park County, and then that's coming all the way from that dam and providing power all the way up through. So that's that, and below it, $500,000 for the consulting services support. And that's coming out of the general fund. Both of those are out of the general fund. So below that, you'll see the total cost. These are have been well thought out, talked about. It's pretty straightforward, Mr. Chairman, with that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've got a couple amendments to this bill, so I would ask that Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 96 be read in at this time.
Senate File 96, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 12, line 7, after.
And fellow senators, this is just when we were moving the state engineer's budget back onto the general fund off of the water development account. We missed $24,000 and change in some administrative costs. So with that, I'd stand for any questions or call for the question on the amendment.
Question.
Thank you. Just to be clear, did you move that amendment? Okay, it's been moved. So all those in favor of Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 96, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 has been adopted. Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would ask that Committee of the Whole Number 1 to Senate File 96 be read in at this time.
Senate File 96, Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1, page 12, line 19, delete.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 96 and ask for your favorable consideration. Fellow senators, this is just a $5 math error on the grand total of things.
Question being called. All those in favor of Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 96, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 96 has been adopted. We're back on the bill. Any discussion on the bill? Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Steinmetz's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with a due pass recommendation of Senate File 96, please say aye. Those opposed? Senate File 96 has passed the committee of the whole. The next bill up for our consideration is Senate File 102. Will the reading clerk please read in the Senate file?
Senate File 102, Food Freedom Act Amendments, sponsored by Senator Salazar, an act relating to marketing homemade foods, was referred to Committee Number 5, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes Senators French, Hicks, Ide, Kolb, and Steinmetz. Senator Steinmetz, Chairman.
Heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Senator Steinmetz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with the recommendation that Senate File 102 do pass. And for an explanation of that good little bill, I call on Senator Salazar.
Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'll explain the bill and then the amendment as well, and then ask for action. Members of the Senate, this is the Food Freedom Act amendment. It's an extremely popular bill. I wish all my bills were as straightforward as this. It's a 5-page bill, non-controversial. This bill was worked out with a cooperation with the Department of Agriculture. And very briefly, what the bill simply does is clarifies the legislative intent back in 2017. All this bill does is allow clarity by allowing dairy products into the bill. It allows dairy products to those who can sell their products at farmers markets, farms, ranches, and homes. If you look specifically at the bill on page 2, line 6, we are putting in a definition of designated agent, which was absent before. On page 4, line 14, the producer shall inform the end consumer that any food product or food sold at the farmer's market or at the ranch or farm is pursuant to this act is not certified, labeled, licensed, packaged, regulated, or inspected. No change from the previous Food Freedom Act, original act from 2017. And then finally on page 5, we make it explicit on line 13, page 5, the Department of Agriculture shall not promulgate any standard for food and health inspection that is applicable to this act that is more stringent than the standard established by the United States Department of Agriculture. So what this simply does is clarify to everyone in the state that we're all on the same playing field. There's been some sense of ambiguity. The Department of Agriculture, I think, supports this. In fact, they contributed to the standing committee amendment that I'm going to bring forward. So I think it's good for your local producers. They're all in support of it. And as I say, it's going to simply help the Food Freedom Act in the future. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would like to dispose of the standing committee amendment first, and I move Standing Committee Amendment 1 to Senate File 102, and would instead for any questions if there are any.
Well, let's read it in first, Senator.
Okay.
Senate File 102, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 2, line 7, delete.
Okay,
Thank
we're
you,
on
Mr.
the
Chairman.
standing committee amendment. Questions on the amendment? Senator Hutchings.
Mr. Chair, quick question. Line 12 through 15 on the amendment. Sometimes we travel and I stop at a gas station and I see homemade cheese, jellies, jams, and I buy them. I buy them with knowing that I don't know where they were made, but they were homemade. And I want to risk eating them, and I have found no problem with eating them. So I'm just wondering why with food freedom did we insert that these homemade or uninspected food items cannot be served in a commercial food establishment when sometimes that's happened to me in the past across the country. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Any more questions before we go back to the bringer here? Seeing none, we'll go back to Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So that is not as far as the Food Freedom Act has gone. We've been cautious. And certainly, in the coming months and years, we can expand it. I know I've been asked to expand it. What I want to do today, however, is simply clarify for the Department of Ag, those inspections that are ongoing, spot inspections. And I think, you know, we are the lead state in the country with regard to the Food Freedom Act. And this is an incredible act. We're clarifying it today. We're making no significant changes. But the good senator has a good point, and I would not be surprised if in 12 months, when we're back, that perhaps maybe that might be something you'll look at. But again, all of our local producers want this desperately. The Department of Ag, as I said, has contributed to this bill. And so if there are no other questions, I move the question.
I think we have a couple. Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll take a stab at answering that last question, and that the commercial food establishment would be a restaurant or somebody wanting to use raw milk or eggs or locally produced eggs or something in the actual product in a restaurant. So that doesn't cover gas stations and some of those other areas. So I hope that helps. Thank you.
Senator Scott, do you have a question?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would like to know what's in the amendment.
Senator Salazar. Try again.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize. So the amendment, page 2, line 7, what we are doing is deleting the to facilitate sales transactions, including, and then simply inserting for the purposes of. So it's simply defining the designated agent and making it clear what the designated agent can and cannot do. Again, if you look at line 3, page 3, line 1, we're deleting facilitate a transaction and simply inserting for the purpose of sales marketing to make it uniform. And then finally on page 3, line 21, after law, we're inserting homemade or uninspected food shall not be served or utilized as an ingredient in a common commercial food establishment, which was always the intent of the original Food Freedom Act to begin with. So.
Thank you, Senator. Any more questions on the standing committee amendment? Question being called. All those in favor of I'm sorry, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There was one more line, and it was the one I was wondering about, which is the deletion of eggs. Just kind of, I'm asking a question about the deletion of eggs late on a Friday afternoon. My apologies. The deletion of eggs on line 2, page 5, I'm curious why that's being withdrawn by the amendment. It seems relevant.
Senator Salazar.
That was deleted because it had to do with labeling, and so it was a bit redundant. It's already covered in the bill, and the dairy was the only thing that was really needed. So.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions on the standing committee amendment? Okay, question being called. All those in favor of adopting standing committee amendment number 1 to Senate File 2, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Standing committee amendment number 1 to Senate File 102 has been adopted. Do we have any other amendments? No? Okay, we're back on the bill. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the bringing of this. This is good and important legislation, and I think the state of Wyoming has done a lot of strong work on this over the years. The question I have is on page 5. It's that same K paragraph where it seems like if the top portion is being modified, then the required label on lines 7 and 8 might need to be amended slightly to conform I was wondering if that was discussed, because obviously if you now have dairy products that are not prepared dairy products, that little label might not make quite as much sense. So was that discussed in committee, and perhaps should that language be amended?
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll just jump in here and see if I can crack this egg. The eggs are labeled under, there's requirements under the federal government as far as eggs go. And so that's all, the language is conforming so that we're not conflicting in state law with what is federal law. And so this is the language the Department of Ag was comfortable with, if that helps. And if there's some tweak we need to make, if you're seeing something we didn't, then we'd be glad to get with you on a second reading amendment to clear that up.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you. I think I was unclear on my question. My apologies. It's the line 7 and 8 is a required permanent label that this food was made in a home kitchen and then is not regulated or inspected and may contain allergens, because the original language in the K paragraph was very specifically towards prepared foods in home kitchens. The language through amendment is now being extended to dairy products which are not prepared in a home kitchen, they're dairy products. So the concept then is that the sign that's required on lines 7 and 8 is not necessarily consistent with the product that's being sold. And I'm just suggesting that perhaps that language on lines 7 and 8 needs to be tweaked to now reflect in some way that it applies to dairy products that are going to be sold at that retail location or grocery store.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I see in a number of places in this bill the words "and dairy products" as new language that's being added. Am I right in understanding that this bill allows the sale of dairy products, milk in specific, and cream and that sort of thing, that has not been pasteurized?
Senator Salazar.
That's correct.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, on and against the bill. Mr. Chairman, this Food Freedom Act has been very useful. There've been a lot of regulatory overreach in areas where there really isn't a significant public health risk. Mr. Chairman, you start selling unpasteurized milk, you're going to have trouble. I don't know how long it's going to take, but that's an invitation to any number of diseases that grow well in the medium of milk that come are present in this milk. Used to be, in the old days, it was a major source of tuberculosis. We've beaten that disease way back so much it's not gone. We've beaten it back so much you rarely see it anymore. But this is asking for trouble with that, because it is a disease that cows get and can transmit by milk. There's a number of bacterial things that can get into milk and grow. Milk was not generally available in public sale until pasteurization came along and made it safe. And I think that when we start allowing dairy products in this, we're going a step too far. We're going to have a disease outbreak that's going to threaten the whole food freedom structure. And I think, Mr. Chairman, given that, I think we're better off without this bill.
Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think you can buy, and most communities already buy, unpasteurized dairy products. I think this bill is a response to an interpretation issue that came up in a individual community. And that's why this clarifying language, I believe it to be clarifying language, is being brought. I can assure you, I run the developing heifers for a friend who has milks cows and makes cheese and produces heavy cream from the milk that she produces and raw milk. and sells it locally in farmers market type establishments and directly to consumers. So I don't think, I agree that there's a risk, but this bill is not adding something that's not already occurring in, at least in my community. Now, the second point, and the good senator is correct, there are diseases that are zoonotic diseases, occur in animals, can be transmitted to humans. You named one, there are numerous others, and certainly we should be concerned about that. And I can assure you the producers, at least the one I'm very familiar with, is very vigilant about the quality of the milk, the health of our livestock, et cetera, testing, et cetera. So if we were having those problems, we would already be seeing them, because I believe this is already occurring. At least I know it's occurring in my community. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to reiterate that, yeah, this ship has sailed. It was in the first Food Freedom Act from however many years ago that was now, it was quite a few, where codified in statute, if you look at the definition, which isn't unfortunately provided in this particular bill, but you go back to the Food Freedom Act, Romanet 11 of the definitions is for a potentially hazardous food, and it makes it clear in there that that includes dairy products and other such similar foods that have the potential for some type of foodborne illness. So there are specific provisions then with regard to the labeling and announcement that were put in place at that time to ensure that there was due notice that if there was unpasteurized milk, for example, that would have to be clearly indicated when it's being sold. So that was how it was remedied. But certainly at this point in time, there's nothing, as I read this, it is a clarification. The designated agent is a bit new to provide some new language, but realistically, as far as whether dairy and eggs should be allowed to be considered, I always assumed they had been. This is consistent with standard practice, and I don't see this as enabling it so much as clarifying what I believe we already had in statute. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Any further discussion? Go ahead, Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My good colleague from Natrona County, if you're interested, there was some testimony yesterday regarding, the risks of raw milk, and I'd just encourage you, if you want to look further, to hear some of the experts talk. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Any further discussion? Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Steinmetz's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report it, do so with a do pass recommendation in Senate File 102, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Senate File 102 has passed the committee of the whole. Next bill, Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Chairman, I have privilege of the floor.
Floor is yours.
Yeah, so we have another guest here today. My daughter Therese is joining us. So she's all of 3 years old, going on 4, likes preschool and Minnie Mouse. So let's go ahead and give her a nice Senate welcome.
Here, here. Welcome to the Senate. It's good to see all the kids here. My kids are back home one's up in Tongue River, and one's on a field trip on her way to Denver for a STEM field trip down there. They're presenting their project down there. So I'll wave to Alyssa as she's probably going by right now on the school bus. But anyway, good to have the kids. Oh. Majority Floor Leader Hicks.
Just as an FYI, we're having a little bit of problem with the board. We're down a little bit with staff today, but so this is what we're going to continue to try to work through, and we'll get to sometime close to 1 o'clock, and then we're going to adjourn. But bear with us. This thing is updated once and caught us all off guard, but. So look up there, make sure you know where we're at and what bills are coming up. So hopefully nothing changes in the next 30 minutes, Mr. Chairman.
Well, Majority Floor Leader, that begs the question. I have in my hand Senate File 87, but I see up on the list Senate File 28 is next. Which do you prefer we do?
Mr. Chairman, I would prefer that we work off of that up there.
All right, let me find number 28 and we'll get that one going here. There it is.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Kensky,
privilege of the floor.
floor is yours.
I'd like to make an announcement before there's a panic for the exits when we gavel out. We do have the budget. It's being distributed electronically, as well as there are hard copies at the front table. There's also something called the SR report. It's a fairly large report that gives you more detail than you're going to find in the budget, that has the budget page numbers and so forth. So those two documents are what we're going to be using on the floor presentation Monday after next. I know you don't want to do it this weekend, but for some that are really eager, I want to get that out there. There's also the new goldenrod is out. That's up there. And then importantly, there's a memo from staff that summarizes the mirror bill process. So some of us are more familiar than others. Some need to refamiliarize themselves with it, and to some it's new. And it's unlike any other way that we process a bill, so it's worth reviewing that memo. And the budget presentation will kick off Monday after next. And anybody has any questions, I'm available, as is the rest of the Joint Appropriations Committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Any more announcements or privileges? Okay, we'll get into it. Next Senate file up for our consideration is Senate File 28. Will the reading clerk please read it in?
Senate File 28, Livestock Infectious Disease Control
Oh, it's
Tribal
easy.
Inclusion, sponsored by the Tribal Relations Committee, an act relating to agriculture. Was referred to Committee Number 5, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Hicks, Ide, Kolb, and Steinmetz. No, Senator French. Senator Steinmetz, Chairman.
Heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Senator Steinmetz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with the recommendation that Senate File 28 do pass, and for an explanation of the bill, I call on the good senator from Laramie County.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There is a standing committee amendment. I'd ask that it be read in at this time.
Senate File 28, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 2, line 15, delete.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move standing committee amendment number 1 to Senate File 28 and will ask the body to vote no, but I'll explain why as we go through the bill. Colleagues, most of you are hopefully familiar with the term brucellosis. It's a serious issue in Wyoming. It's a disease that's often present in big game such as bison and elk. When it's transmitted to domestic cattle and other domestic livestock, it can cause females to abort their fetus. So this is a very serious disease and a very serious issue for our cattle producers, primarily in Wyoming, Mr. Chairman. On the game and fish side, they have a number of programs to monitor brucellosis in wildlife. But on the domestic livestock side, it's our livestock board, which has a number of programs to ensure that Wyoming remains a brucellosis-free state. Being a brucellosis-free state is a federal designation. It requires some criteria be met through the USDA. And this designation is important to our cattle industry, and it's one that we work very vigorously to defend. The Wyoming Livestock Board thus has authority to do a number of things to ensure that we maintain that status and mitigate threats. For those of you who work in this industry, you know that they might designate certain surveillance areas if there's a concern that cattle have been contaminated or exposed to brucellosis. They have testing programs. If cattle is found to have brucellosis, then there are herd risk assessments, herd risk management plans on how to quarantine, and even dispose of these animals to prevent future and potential spread of this disease. So a number of these programs through these programs, the Livestock Board has authority to act when it comes to operations located in Wyoming. However, a concern arose about what was happening on the reservation. The reservation does not necessarily have all these programs in place. And so your Select Tribal Relations Committee became aware of this issue, and mainly producers outside the reservation were asking what can be done to ensure that we're working together with our tribes to ensure that brucellosis isn't transmitted from cattle found on the reservation to off-reservation. So rather than try and interfere with the tribe's sovereign rights. We don't have a duty, our livestock board does not have a right to enter the Wind River Reservation to inspect animals. So the solution we came up with is found in this bill. And this is more of a voluntary approach. For those livestock producers that want to avail themselves to all of these programs for testing, herd risk assessment, herd risk management plans, the state recognizes that there's a cost to all producers in Wyoming. But we want to encourage people to voluntarily report. And by helping to allay some of those costs associated with implementing these plans, we proactively offer some financial assistance. So what this bill does, Mr. Chairman, it simply clarifies that for any cattle producer or domestic livestock producer on the reservation, if they want to avail themselves to these voluntary programs, that we will treat them as we do any other cattle producers in an effort to make sure we're maintaining and reducing any risk of brucellosis infection state. Again, with the whole goal of maintaining Wyoming's status as a brucellosis-free state. So if you look on page 2, the new paragraph D there clarifies that the state veterinarian can provide contagious and infectious reportable disease testing, containment, and reimbursement services under this chapter. On to the amendment. At the bottom of that new paragraph, you'll see some clarifying or some additional requirements that with the state livestock board in consultation with the state veterinarian and the Eastern Shoshone, the Northern Arapaho tribe, both tribes or the cooperative tribal governing body can enter into certain agreements. We'll need to bring a clarifying amendment to strike the words both tribes or, that's a redundant statement. The term cooperative tribal governing body covers that. As we heard this bill in the committee, there was some concern over whether or not the program would be available to wild bison that are on the reservation. So the standing committee, as we discussed it, would have inserted the words that the testing, containment, and reimbursement for services provided under this section should only apply to domestic bison. In looking at that language a little bit closer, we think a better way of saying it is that it would not apply to any wild bison. With the current language in the standing committee amendment, it would limit participation only to domestic bison and not include domestic cattle or livestock. So unfortunately, because of the bill orders moving around on the board, we had LSO, I was just about to pull the trigger on getting a new amendment circulated. I will bring a second reading amendment to you. So at this time, I would ask that you vote no on the standing committee amendment. And if you have any further clarifications, I'm sure the good chairwoman of the Senate Ag Committee can offer her suggestion as well.
Thank you, Senator. Discussion on the standing committee amendment. And the motion was to vote no on the standing committee amendment. This question being called. All those in favor of standing committee amendment number 1 to Senate File 28, please say aye. Those opposed?
No.
Standing committee amendment 1 to Senate File 28 has not been adopted. We're back on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Happy to answer any questions.
Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I do appreciate this, as I served on that board for 6 years prior to entering the legislature. I do have one concern. This is on page 3 of the bill, line 15, excuse me, and it talks about negotiating with the relevant parties, and the new language is tribes in regions adjacent to Wyoming. And I want to make sure that we understand the way I would read that. Would be in a tribe, maybe in the state to the north of us, or the state to the east of us, or the state to the west of us, who may be adjacent to us. But does it actually have us able to negotiate with the folks within the state? That would be just a clarification, so if there's any discussion on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Ellis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will take a close look at that and make sure that we've got the language right. And if we need an amendment, just expect a second reading amendment regardless, but we'll look into that issue more closely.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the bill? Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Steinmetz's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report it, do so with a do pass recommendation of Senate File 28, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Senate File 28 has passed the committee of the whole. All right, next Senate file up for our consideration is Senate File 87. Will the reading clerk please read it in?
Senate File 87, Natural Resource Funding, Large Project Threshold Increase, sponsored by Senator Cooper, an act relating to the administration of the government. Was referred to committee number 5, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Aye, Senators French, Hicks, Ide, Kolb, and Steinmetz. Senator Steinmetz, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Senator Steinmetz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with the recommendation that Senate File 87 do pass. And for an explanation of the good little bill, I call on the senator right in front of me.
That looks like Senator Cooper to me. Go ahead, Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank the Ag Committee for the work they did with me on this bill. The genesis for this bill in the Natural Resource Large Project Funding Committee, we felt that the cap for the small projects needed to be raised a little bit. The original cap was $200,000 set in 2005. Prices have risen considerably since then. And on a recent bill here we looked at, we ended up with 9 large projects rather than 5. The other 4 would have fallen within this threshold. So with that said, I'll go right into the bill. On page 2, line 4 and 5, we're raising the cap from $200,000 to $400,000 for the small projects. And again, on line 9 and 10, $200,000 to $400,000. These projects, these small projects, it's discretionary spending by the board. It's not the director, it's not individuals. It's the board that decides on these projects. And a lot of them are things like stream erosion, or maybe some cheatgrass mitigation, or maybe grasshopper mitigation, things that really won't wait another year for the legislative body to come back together and approve the spending. So the board has the authority to go ahead and move forward with these projects as they come up, and that's really critical for the work they do. Question's been asked, why 400,000? Where'd that number come from? We took the bills that would have normally fallen into that 200,000 range this year and looked at them and said, if we can get them in that 400,000 or less range, I think we can get them done. So that's the number that we came up with. Is it the right number? I don't know. You can bump it up if you want, but the fact is, these projects are a lot more expensive than they were 17 years ago, and hopefully this group won't have to come back for the next 17 years and ask for another raise. So the spending is the source of these funds is, again, the income account for the Wildlife Trust Fund. These are not state funds that we're pushing out there. This is their money. We're giving them the authority to spend a small portion of it on discretionary projects. The second part of this, on line, let me look here, page 2, line 21 and 22, raises that additional funds threshold from 100,000 to 200,000. On some of these bigger projects, this is for additional funds on the large projects only. We need to make that clear. So if we got a huge cheatgrass or something similar to our Medicine Bow project, and we need just a few more funds to finish it up, this gives them the discretion to go ahead and finish that up. And if it's anything more than that 200,000 that they're going to overspend, they have to come back for legislative approval. So that's the bill. Pretty simple, and I ask for your approval.
Any discussion on Senate File 87? See, question being called. All those in favor of Senator Steinmetz's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report it, do so with a do pass recommendation of Senate File 87, please say aye. Those opposed? Senate File 87 has passed the committee of the whole. Next bill up for our consideration is Senate File 65. Will the reading clerk please read it in?
Senate File 65, Compensation of Local Registrars Repeal, sponsored by Senator Baldwin, an act relating to vital records, was referred to Committee Number 10, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Barlow, Bouchard, Dockstader, and Hutchings. Senator Baldwin, Chairman.
Heard the reading of the bill. What's your pleasure, Senator Baldwin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move when the committee of the whole rises to report that it do so with a recommendation that Senate File 65 do pass. And for explanation of this long, complicated bill, I turn you to Senator Hutchings.
All right, Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick explanation on Senate File 65. It looks as if our county clerks have gotten together and they want to save money. So what they've done is look through some of the statutes and some of the things that they've been doing in the past. Our Wyoming Statute 35-140 mentions that the person who refused certain records, death and birth records, vital records, be paid 50 cents. And they found through automation that this is more costly than not. Some of the people that are already performing this duty, state workers, are being compensated by their salaries. Coroners and funeral directors also are being compensated via their salaries. So they want to repeal this section of our Wyoming statutes to save money, which I think is great. That is the explanation of the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Any discussion? Seeing none, question being called. All those in favor of Senator Baldwin's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report it, do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 65, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Senate File 65 has passed the committee of the whole. Next bill up for our consideration is Senate File 76. Will the reading clerk please read it in?
Is that what you said?
Senate File 76, Wyoming Digital Asset Registration Act, sponsored by the Blockchain Committee, an act relating to digital assets. It was referred to Committee Number 7, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Barlow, Boner, Case, and Landon. No, Senator Scott. Senator Case, Chairman. Was re-referred to Committee Number 2, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Guru, Kinski, Nethercott, and Salazar. Senator Kinski, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure? Who wants to? Senator Case, is this you?
You bet it is, Mr.
All right, have at it, Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, I move that when the committee of the whole rises to report it, do so with a do pass recommendation on Senate File 76, Wyoming Digital Assets Registration Act. Is there a standing committee amendment?
There is.
I'd ask that it be read in at this time.
Senate File 76, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 1, line 4, after.
Mr. Chairman, I would move standing committee amendment to Senate File 76. And for an explanation of the bill and handling the amendment, I'd ask that you yield to Senator Rothfuss from the Blockchain Task Force.
All
Not
right.
blockhead, blockchain, Mr. Chairman.
Duly noted. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Wyoming Digital Asset Registration Act is the work of the Blockchain Select Committee from the interim. This is a concept that is relatively new, and once again, Wyoming is trying to be the leader in this space, recognizing that there's a demand for a service, but there is no state, nor even at the federal level, where there's an opportunity to provide this registration service. So, Mr. Chairman, digital assets are defined in statute and have a pretty broad range of what they might be, and you've probably heard of things like cryptocurrency, you've heard of stable coins, stable tokens, non-fungible tokens. These are all things that we've discussed in the past, and each of these are a type of digital asset. As written, this legislation is broad, and what it does is it provides an opportunity for an owner of a digital asset, wherever they are, whether they're in Wyoming or outside of Wyoming, to have a vehicle to register ownership of that digital asset as a Wyoming registered asset. So what does that mean? That means that for the purposes of property rights and establishing where this digital asset is, it would be established as being in Wyoming. So why is that useful? Well, Wyoming, over the past 5 years, has developed quite a bit of statutory construction and regulatory construction that provides clarity with regard to digital asset property rights. We've developed a chancery court that provides an opportunity to work through any grievances or concerns related to this type of property. And this then provides that registration opportunity. So again, with the registration opportunity, let's go to why that's needed. There is no clarity on a digital asset of where it is. Typically, a digital asset that's on a blockchain and perhaps in a database might actually simultaneously be on computer servers in 9 places around the world. So whose jurisdiction do you use? Why would you use a jurisdiction? There's a tremendous value to the state of Wyoming, the people of Wyoming, as well as digital asset holders, to have the clarity that we provide and for us to say, yes, that is a Wyoming asset. Imagine, for example, that you have a corporation along the West Coast that for taxation purposes would much rather have their asset residing in this particular state, where it can be treated by Wyoming tax structure as Wyoming intangible personal property. That's an advantage that we would like to take advantage of, and that's the purpose for this legislation. I'll walk through it quickly. I recognize that we're relatively short on time and that everyone would like to go home. Mr. Chairman, on page 2, this is implemented through the Secretary of State's office. You see in paragraph A on line 9, a discussion of the lawful owner of any digital asset or their agent shall be deemed to be located within the state for purposes of all laws and regulations of the state if they provide registration through this system and service. The B provision indicates that the Secretary of State shall provide a registration that is cryptographically signed, so that basically means a blockchain-style transaction that is secure and uses public key, private key encryption. On paragraph C, page 3, nothing in this article shall be construed to confer any ownership. And you'll see that there's an attestation of ownership and there's a mechanism for proof of ownership, but by registering, it does not confer ownership, which is just a subtle nuance of the language to ensure that you have to have owned it prior to registering. There's an application fee associated with it as well as an application process. And one key provision here is that to register, you have to be domiciled in Wyoming or an individual citizen of Wyoming. And the way we utilize that, then we would want entities from wherever in the world that has these digital assets to create an LLC, register that LLC in Wyoming, and then that would be the asset holder so that we always have contact with that entity, whether it's an individual person or through their registered agent. You see on page 4 requirements for the registration, information about the entity, an application fee up to $300. On page 5, you see examination of the application for completeness, as well as if the Secretary of State has any questions, they can ask those questions to find out details as necessary, or if problems arise, they can work through that onto page 6. The term of the registration as written is 5 years, and there would be a renewal 5 years after initiation of $150 or not more than $150 to continue. Page 7, it's a public record. The digital assets would be presented as a public record, which is actually instrumental in how this all works. There's a mechanism for cancellation of the registration, which may be taken up based on court decisions or simply based on the entity wanting to provide cancellation. On 9, you have the possibility of false or fraudulent representations, powers of the Secretary of State to implement these provisions. And then on page 10 and on to early 11, you have the applicability of the Wyoming Chancery Court to grievances under this, assuming that they exceed the $50,000 minimum for a Chancery Court decision. The statutory construction was based on the fact that the state of Wyoming already has trademark authority, so it's largely mirrored to that and then amended consistent with the needs of digital asset technology. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would move on to the Well, and you can see incidentally that there is a Section 4 effectiveness date of October 1st, 2023, which brings us to the first provision, which should be in the standing committee, but does not appear to be in the standing committee. So that's going to end up being a second committee amendment, or excuse me, a second reading amendment. So the standing committee amendment number 1 gets to a request by the Secretary of State's office that they did an estimate after consideration of what it would cost for them to reprogram their public-facing registration system to provide the required compliant technologies and coding, and they came up with an estimate of $270,000. So the amendment of Standing Committee Amendment number 1 is an appropriation of $270,000 to provide this service, which is the cost. And as you think of that potentially as an expense, realize that the Secretary of State's office brings in $60 million of revenue every biennium over a cost of $8.5 million. And almost all of that is due to registration and their operations in the business space. This is a money-making endeavor. I can say that with DAOs, we already have over 500 newly registered corporations that are decentralized autonomous organizations bringing in over $50,000 or $60,000 worth of revenue each year for that project. So while there's a small upfront investment, it is my assurance to you in the Senate that it will be a money-making endeavor in a short time, Mr. Chairman. With that, we are on the Standing Committee Amendment. I'd be happy to answer any questions on it. If there are none, I'd ask for the question.
Any questions on the Standing Committee Amendment?
Question.
Question being called. All those in favor of adopting Standing Committee Amendment number 1, the Senate File 76, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Standing Committee Amendment number 1, the Senate File 76 has been adopted. We're back on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the one last thing that I expected to be in the Standing Committee Amendment, and I'm sorry for it not being here, was that the Secretary of State's office asked for an extension of the effective date from October 1st to December 1st. That will be coming then on second reading. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions if there are any on the Digital Asset Registration Act.
Questions, comments, discussion on Senate File 76. Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, just very briefly, I was the no in committee, and in this case, I'm not opposed to the concept of what they're doing. I think they haven't quite got the permanency of the Wyoming registration and the asset being here adequately dealt with. You can lose it by selling to somebody who's out of state, and then when you come back, you don't have it. And I think there's an opportunity here that they need to refine on a second or third reading amendment to really take advantage of the opportunity that's here. So I would urge us to pass it through committee of the whole.
Any further discussion? Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Case's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with a do pass recommendation of Senate File 76, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. Senate File 76 is passed the committee of the whole. Majority Floor Leader Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee of the whole rise and report.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Aye. Thank you very much.
Let's get some work done.
This is all yours, Mr. President.
Nice job, A. Committee of the whole report, please.
Mr. President, your Committee of the Whole, having had under considerations bills on general file, begs leave to report as follows. Senate File 23, do pass amended. Senate File 106, do pass amended. Senate File 41, do pass amended. Senate File 96, do pass amended. Senate File 102, do pass amended. Senate File 28, do pass. Senate File 87, do pass. Senate File 65, do pass. Senate File 76, do pass amended. Senator Beitman, Chairman.
Senator Beitman.
I move the adoption of the committee of the whole report, Mr. President.
You've heard the motion. All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carried. Report has been adopted. Standing committee reports, please.
January 20, 2023, Mr. Presidential Committee Number 4, Education, to whom is referred Senate File 114, Constitutional Instruction and Examination Requirements. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Beitman, Brennan, Scott, and Steinmetz. No, Senator Rothfuss. Senator Scott, Chairman.
Thank you, Randy. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, that clears the desk.
Mr. President, before I close this out, just a heads up for next Tuesday. The Republicans will be caucusing at 10 a.m. downstairs. Mr. President, with that, Mr. President, I move that we stand adjourned until 10:30 a.m. Tuesday, January 23rd, I believe.
Thank you. Announcements. Senator Boner.
24.
Mr. President, your committee number 8, Transportation, Highways, and Military Affairs, will meet upon adjournment in 15 minutes. 15 minutes, committee. If you haven't got lunch already, just grab it and head on down to the Capitol Extension Room W2, and online we will consider Senate File 17, Off-Road Recreational Vehicles, Safety, and Insurance.
Senator Case.
Mr. President, your committee number 7, Corporations, will meet Tuesday morning at 7:30 a.m. to take up the following bills. Senate File 64 by Senator Nethercott, Malt Beverage Manufacturing Amendments. Senate File 93, Limited Liability Company Reporting. Senate File 105 by Senator Steinmetz, Utilities, Point of Consumption and Allocation Agreements. Senate File 121, sponsored by Senator Driscoll, Indexing Unemployment Insurance. We'll hear all those on Tuesday. And then we're going to be working on Thursday too. So thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee number 5, Agriculture, State and Public Lands and Water Resources, will meet Tuesday on adjournment in room W2 and online to consider the following bills. Senate File 124, Foreign Ownership of Agricultural Land. Senate File 137, Subdivisions, Fencing Requirements. And Senate File 134, Right to Farm Real Estate Disclosures. Thank you.
Vice President Kinski.
Mr. Chairman, on Tuesday, January 24, your Appropriations Committee, Committee Number 2, upon noon recess in room 113, W113, will hear Senate File 62, Legislative Healthcare 2, Senate Joint Resolution 8, Legislative Stabilization Reserve Account Spending Limits, and we will also hear a Public Employee Retirement Plan Contributions Bill, for which we do not yet have the number, but I just wanted to give a heads up to the public on that. And then we will hear additional re-referrals as received and as time permits. Thank you.
Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Committee number 6, Travel, Wildlife, Recreation, and Cultural Resources, will meet Tuesday at 8 o'clock in room W2 to consider 2 bills, Senate File 33, Defining Aircraft for Purposes of Hunting Prohibitions, and Senate File 113, Architects Practice Act Amendments.
Senator Scott.
Mr. President, your committee number 4, Education, will resume our meeting from this morning downstairs in room 110. Finish our work on Senate File 117, Parent Rights in Education. Approximately 10 minutes from now, we've heard public testimony, and what we're going to do is work the bill.
Everybody.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee number 3, Revenue, will meet Tuesday, January 24th, 30 minutes upon noon recess in Capitol Extension Room W6 to take up the following bills. Senate File 136, Property Tax Relief Assessment Rate Reduction. Senate Joint Resolution 12, Constitutional Amendment, Property Tax Valuation. Senate File 110, Personal Property Tax Exemptions. And Senate File 101, Wyoming Legal Tender Act Amendments as time permits, Mr. President.
Thank you. Quick reminder for everybody, there's lots of lunch left over, so before you leave, grab and go for the road so we're not feeding the rodents with it. Eat it all out. Got chips, cookies, soup, salad, sandwiches, whole 9 yards. Front table, most important. The budgets are out. They're at the front table. Pick them up, take them home for the weekend. That's going to be our study subject for the caucus on Tuesday. So have your budgets, have a good look at them and do it. Huge thank you to everybody in here. We've had another great week. Safe travels, 3-day weekend. Enjoy yourselves and see everybody Tuesday. With that being said, you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. Senate will stand recessed until 10:30 a.m. Tuesday, January 23rd.